This is Nightly Business Report with Tyler Matheson and Susie Garrett. Brought to you by...
Sailing through the heart of historic cities and landscapes on a river, you get close to iconic landmarks, to local life, to cultural treasures. Viking River Cruises, exploring the world in comfort.
Triple-digit gains. Stocks are up. Oil is down as the risk of a U.S.-led attack on Syria fades. And President Obama prepares to deliver a speech to the nation.
The Dow's big facelift. Goldman Sachs, Nike, and Visa are in the world's most famous stock market index. Alcoa, Hewlett-Packard, and Bank of America out. What the moves mean if you own the shares or might want to someday.
And new phones, new price, new colors. Apple introduces two new smartphones designed to expand its reach into new markets. But shares fell, leaving investors to wonder what it'll take to juice up the stock. All that and more tonight on Nightly Business Report for Tuesday, September 10th.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Tyler Matheson alongside Susie Garrett. Rally on. Another triple-digit gain for the Dow today, capping the biggest two-day rally for the industrial index since the end of June. The S&P 500 scored its sixth straight up day, and that is the best such streak for it in nearly 2 months. And NASDAQ closed at a fresh 13-year high for good measure. The main reason for those gains, Syria. Specifically, the prospect that diplomatic overtures by Russia and Damascus may delay a U.S. military strike to retaliate for the Assad regime's alleged use of chemical weapons. Also drawing investor interest today, big changes announced this morning in the composition of the Dow Jones Industrial Average, and we'll take a deeper look at that in just a few minutes' time. Meanwhile, the numbers on Wall Street today, the Dow soared 128 points, ending solidly back above 15,000. The NASDAQ was up nearly 23, and the S&P added 12. While stocks climbed, selected commodities swooned as some of the fear premium got sweated out of prices as the march to military action against Syria slowed. Oil prices dropped nearly 2% today. That's the biggest one-day decline in 3 weeks there, while gold tumbled nearly $23 an ounce.
More now on developments in that Syria crisis. President Obama is preparing to deliver a primetime speech tonight at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. He'll be making a case for both the threat of U.S. military action and signs of hope for a diplomatic solution. John Harwood joins us now from Washington with the latest. So, John, what can we expect to hear from the president tonight?
Well, Susie, I think we're going to hear a different message than we would have before this Russian-Syrian initiative. And that is, instead of having to plead for support in the country, which was plainly reluctant to approve military force and pleading with members of Congress to support him, he's able to go to them now and say, my policy has produced this diplomatic breakthrough, keep supporting me, but there's not the same kind of urgency, and that's a relief to the administration, to Congress, and maybe to some Americans as well.
So how has this diplomatic track now changed President Obama's task tonight? You just sort of obliquely referred to it. What's different now?
Well, here's what's the same. What's not different is there's very strong opposition within the public to going ahead with this. There was an NBC Wall Street Journal poll that was released today that showed 6 in 10 Americans opposed the idea of going ahead. We saw those numbers reflected in the attitudes of members in Congress, members of the Senate. And so the president has got to try to encourage people to help him keep the pressure on. He's making the argument, and he will tonight, that the credible threat of U.S. military force is what's produced this diplomatic initiative, but he's going to make the urging Americans and the members of Congress not to undercut him by denying him the ability to threaten force if the diplomatic track fails.
So President Obama makes his case tonight, John, and then what happens?
What happens is, first of all, there will be a process of some sort in the United Nations. There were some fits and starts with that today, but the president consulted with President Hollande of France, Prime Minister Cameron of Britain, and they're trying to move ahead with international opinion and trying to rally an international coalition in the United Nations, NATO, other people, to try to advance this initiative. The votes in Congress are delayed. They were going to happen both in the House and Senate this week and next. Now that's not going to happen. But you do have the president making this case and then giving it probably a week or two to show that there's credibility and sincerity behind the effort. You did have the Syrian foreign minister saying today that Syria will acknowledge the existence of its chemical weapons and sign the chemical weapons convention. That's only a first step, though.
John Harwood, thank you very much. We'll all be watching tonight. Well, as we mentioned earlier, a big shakeup for the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Starting September 23rd, the Dow will drop 3 of its 30 member companies and replace them with 3 new ones. Alcoa, Bank of America, Hewlett-Packard, out. Goldman Sachs, Visa, Nike, in. Dominic Chu tells us why and what it might mean for the stocks involved.
The Dow determines how important a stock is to the index by looking at share price. So with Alcoa, Bank of America, and HP all trading between $8 and $23 per share, while companies like IBM and Chevron boast triple-digit price tags, Dow Jones saw an opportunity to shake things up, shedding the lower price value stocks in favor of adding some more diverse names. Case in point, Visa, adding the credit card giant, gives a little color to the index, both on the new age payment technology industry and consumer habits. Meanwhile, Nike, which does much of its business overseas, is seen as a barometer for economic growth in emerging markets. And by adding Goldman Sachs, the Dow gets some insight into traditional mergers, acquisitions, and corporate deal-making. But does being added to the Dow mean the stock is a buy for investors? Let's take a look. The last time the index added a new ticker was last September when United Healthcare replaced Kraft Foods. A year later, shares of United Health were up 33%. It's a similar story for Travelers and Cisco Systems, which posted 19% and 15% gains respectively after being added to the Dow in 2009. But that kind of performance isn't always the norm. In 2008, Chevron, Bank of America, and Kraft all saw their stock plummet the first year after being included in the Dow. That move did coincide with the market lows after the U.S. entered recession, so it's tricky to make any inferences there. But back in 2004, the last time we saw the Dow pick up 3 new names in the same day, it was AIG, Pfizer, and Verizon. They all finished lower a year after index inclusion. Bottom line, today's moves in the Dow might be noteworthy, but many experts say it's not the only thing to consider when picking a stock to buy or sell. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Dominic Chu.
And here's how the stocks involved in the changes performed today. All of the ones being added to the Dow, Goldman Sachs, Nike, Visa, they were higher. For the ones being taken out, both Hewlett-Packard and Alcoa finished lower. Bank of America, meantime, moved up by 13 cents.
Joining us now to talk more about the changes made to the Dow Jones Industrial Average is David Blitzer. He's chairman of the S&P 500 Index Committee. David, great to have you with us. You have been presiding over these kinds of changes for a long, long time. So put it in perspective for us. What does this mean for investors if they own the stocks of Visa, Goldman Sachs, or Nike, or if they're thinking of buying it? What does all this mean?
Well, the stocks, the fact that they reacted today is no surprise. This kind of news puts stocks in the news and people respond to it. But the reactions are typically very short term. My guess is by the end of this week, or if not by this time next week, those reactions will all be out and there won't be any permanent changes. And I think the ones that were mentioned earlier, the permanent changes were the general movements of the market, much more than the stocks. What it really means for investors is that the Dow is a slightly different index, and I believe, and we all believe here at S&P Dow Jones, a much better index. It's price-weighted. The 3 stocks that came out together were only 3% of the index in terms of their weight. The top stock, IBM, was 9.5%. IBM is going to squeeze down to 8%. It won't be so dominant. The smallest stock, instead of being 0.4%, will be about 1%. So we have a much better balance in the index than we did before. Mm-hmm. It will be a more reliable indicator of what's happening in the market.
You have replaced, David, 3 lower price stocks, in fact, the 3 lowest price stocks with the Dow, with 3 higher price stocks. In this price-weighted index, which is a really critical concept to appreciate here, does this change make the Dow more volatile, less volatile, no change at all?
If anything, I think it might make it a touch less volatile. When one point in a stock, whether it's on an $8 stock like Alcoa or a $185 stock on IBM, 1 point does the same amount and that kind of thing. But when you have an $8 stock it just tends to bounce around a lot more than the $185 stock. So if anything, maybe a touch less volatile, but the volatility wasn't really a concern. These are all big, well-known, liquid stocks. This is not like emerging market stock where they bounce like crazy or something. So we weren't worried about that.
You know, David, when investors hear about changes like this, they start thinking like, well, why didn't this company or that company get invited to the index? And the two names that came up a lot today, Google and Apple, they have a huge influence on the economy, and they are widely traded stocks. What's the story there?
All right. Well, first we should say about Google, Apple, and all the other stocks mentioned, changing an index is not an investment recommendation by any means, neither positive nor negative. Google is about $885 a share. Apple, I don't know the number offhand, but it's well north of $200 or $300. Had we put Google in the index and taken out a stock with a price of $100, Google's weight would be about 28%. And if we put Apple into it, it would be the Google Apple Index and nothing else. Okay. And that's not what we're doing. We want 30 stocks that do a nice balanced job of representing the large cap blue chip part of the market. And I think that's what we're getting this time.
By the way, David, Apple stock is around $500, and we're going to be talking about that a little bit later in the program. But thanks a lot, David. David Blitzer, chairman of the S&P 500 Index Committee.
Well, the Dow Industrials weren't the only thing that got a facelift today. So did the Apple iPhone. 2 new models, 8 fresh colors, 1 new operating system, and plastic. Yes, plastic cases. All announced today with typical Apple fanfare in an event at company headquarters in Cupertino. Our John Fort was there.
Well, we got the annual iPhone announcement, and we didn't just get the 5S, we also got the 5C, but it wasn't priced quite as low as some people expected. The iPhone 5C, widely expected, did arrive, and it's plastic on the back, 5 colors, but it's expected to retail for $549 unsubsidized, a lot more expensive than a number of analysts were hoping. And the announcement comes at a time when Apple is facing increasing competition, especially in emerging markets where brands like Samsung have challenged the iPhone's dominance. A number of people were hoping that the 5C would open up new opportunities for Apple.
It was different than what we had expected. The real framework was consistent, which is the 5S and the 5C. The big difference is on the price of the 5C. We had expected Apple to be more aggressive with that. Our belief is that they're probably going to be more aggressive with the price of the 4S and actually keep the 4 around for longer. So that's different than what we had thought about.
There weren't a lot of surprises in the announcement, but some interesting new features on the 5S, an improved camera as usual, also improved wireless capabilities, all of which ties into iOS's new features in its software that allow a camera that shoots in burst mode and also with slow motion. Of course, the proof of the pudding, as they say, is in the eating, and buyers will get to do that eating in just about 3 days when pre-orders start for the 5C. Both the 5C and the 5S go on sale on September 20th, so there'll be 2 full weekends of sales. And once we get to see how China responds, China's a launch country for the first time, we'll have a better read on whether Apple has made a good decision or a bad one with pricing at these levels. For Nightly Business Report, I'm John Fort.
And when we come back, what will it take to boost Apple's stock? We'll have that answer coming up. But first, here are 54 companies that hit 52-week highs today. That's the largest number since early August. And here's a look at some of them.
Investors are getting excited about bonds that Verizon is about to sell. People familiar with the offering, set to price tomorrow, say orders for the bonds are running at more than $90 billion. Verizon had expected to sell $30 to $40 billion of bonds to finance its $130 billion buyout of Vodafone's stake in Verizon Wireless. The 10-year bonds are expected to yield 2.25 percentage points more than comparable U.S. Treasuries.
Trouble is brewing between upscale coffee press maker Bodum Group and JCPenney. Bodum and Penny reached a deal nearly a year ago to open up store-within-a-store boutiques featuring Bodum's kitchen, houseware, and stationery products. But the struggling retailer never delivered and is now being sued for breach of contract.
We begin Market Focus tonight with a slide in another teen retailer. Urban Outfitters warns that sales for the current quarter aren't growing as fast as Wall Street expects. It's the latest in a string of weak reports for retailers that cater to that age group. Investors punished the stock. It fell more than 10% to $38.35, and that made it the worst performing stock in the S&P 500 today. PVH, which includes brands like Calvin Klein, Tommy Hilfiger, also dropping on a weak outlook for the year. The apparel company says consumer spending has been weak and the recovery slow. On an investor conference call, the company's CEO said that the larger economy is still volatile, leading to erratic sales trends. PVH shares fell more than 5% to $124.66. And things aren't much different for Crocs, the footwear maker, cutting its third quarter outlook, citing weaker sales in the U.S. But the company says it does expect weakness here to be offset somewhat by stronger results in Asia and Europe. The stock did fall more than 2%, $13.31 the close there.
McDonald's reporting a bigger than expected rise in global sales last month, and that's thanks to strong results out of Europe. The world's biggest fast food chain said sales rose slightly in the U.S., helped by the company's Monopoly promotion. McDonald's also said that it has plans to add more value items to its menu. Shares rose a fraction to $96.89. A strong earnings report from Five Below helped boost its shares today. The retailer beat estimates, reported a rise in sales, and raised its full-year earnings and revenue forecast. The store sells games, candy, and other goods for $5 or less. Shares soared more than 17% to $48 and change. And Cisco, the world's largest supplier of internet routers and switches, is acquiring a privately held firm to help speed up its servers. It's paying more than $400 million for Whiptail. This is the first time Cisco is getting into the data storage market. Cisco shares closed at $24 and change, a gain of 1%.
Amazon.com getting into the flower business. The world's largest online retailer has sold flowers for years, but always through third-party suppliers. Now, Amazon is selling and shipping its own flowers through what it is calling the Amazon Curated Flower Collection.
Sandy Weil, the former chairman and CEO of Citigroup, who's credited with inventing the concept of the supermarket-style bank, is doing a 180. Weil stunned Wall Street last year by calling for a breakup of the nation's biggest banks, separating their investment banking from their commercial banking operations. Well, now, Weil says the big banks don't have to split up if the right regulation is in place, but he says firms should be able to decide on their own what works best.
If we have regulation that precludes investment banking operating in a way that it can be constructive, then I think we should do something different and let them split up if they figure that's the best way that they can provide their services.
And back now to Apple. More now on the colorful new iPhones and that new pricing that the company hopes will help it, most especially over in China. Will the moves put some color back into Apple's stock? Tom Forte is an internet analyst with Telsey Advisory Group, and he joins us on the phone because of some audio difficulties. Tom, welcome. Is that an iPhone you're holding there or not?
Yep, it's the iPhone 5, and I look forward to purchasing the 5S.
All right, is the iPhone 5S, which is the sort of higher-end version announced today, is that, and is the iPhone 5C, the color version, a lower price, is that enough to juice the stock and get it moving higher?
I do believe it is. So if you look at the $60 billion repurchase program they announced in April, I think that can provide a floor and support for the stock. But it's really going to be new innovation, such as the updated lineup and expanded lineup of smartphones, and then potentially televisions, watches, and then the next generation lineup of iPads that's going to drive the stock further from here.
You know, people are waiting for some big hit, the big innovation. You talk about the TV or the watch. I mean, were you wowed by anything that was announced today?
I think from a technological standpoint, the most impressive portion of the announcement related to the fingerprint authentication. I think that could be a catalyst for smartphone-enabled commerce, both within a store and online.
I thought from a technological standpoint, that was the best announcement.
And that would, as you suggest, make it much more easy and secure, presumably, to do mobile payments. Am I getting that right, Tom?
Yes. I think you can't overstate the easy part. So pushing your smartphone, using your fingerprint to make a purchase, at the minimum to buy music via iTunes, at the maximum perhaps to make a purchase on Amazon.com, I think that's very important.
So tell us a little bit about how these new phones stack up against the competition. We know that Samsung has been really winning over a lot of iPhone fans from the past. What about now?
I really think that when iPhone came out with the 5 and Samsung did that brilliant advertising campaign where they basically showed point for point how they had Apple met or exceeded from a technological standpoint, I think that was really a turning point in the smartphone category. I look at what Apple's doing with the 5S at kind of the higher end and the 5C at the lower end, and it reminds me a little of what's going on with Google and Motorola, where the Android is their most technologically proficient device and Moto X is more their broad mainstream device. So I think that Apple has enough here to keep the Apple enthusiast happy.
All right, Tom Forte on the iPhone for us tonight. We appreciate you being with us. He's an internet analyst at the Telsey Advisory Group. And coming up, the wireless wars are heating up. Walmart is getting in on the action, launching one of the biggest smartphone trade-in programs ever. We'll have the details next. But first, let's take a look at how commodities, currencies, and treasuries perform today. Some of the nation's best known and costliest colleges may actually be among the most affordable for students. According to U.S. News and World Report, the average student receiving financial aid at universities like Harvard or Yale only paid about a quarter of the listed or sticker tuition price. And most of the graduates at those top-tier Ivy League schools leave with smaller debt loads than students who attend less prestigious schools.
U.S. employers advertised fewer job openings in July, but they still managed to hire more new workers that same month. The Labor Department reports that companies advertised 3.7 million open jobs in July, but that was 200,000 less from June.
More good news about the turnaround in the nation's housing market. The real estate website CoreLogic reports that rising home prices have significantly lowered the number of homeowners who are currently underwater, meaning those who owe more on their mortgages than their homes are worth.
Earlier in the program, we told you about Apple unveiling 2 new iPhones today. Now, if you're looking to trade in an older smartphone model in order to trade up to a newer one, Walmart is about to make that a whole lot easier. Courtney Reagan has our story.
Apple isn't the only big company making a smartphone announcement today. Walmart is announcing the largest brick-and-mortar smartphone trade-in program in the country, just in time for consumers to trade up to the new iPhone 5S. Starting September 21st in 3,600 Walmart and Sam's Club locations, consumers can trade in old smartphones to receive an instant credit, ranging from $50 to $300 that's immediately applied to the purchase of a new smartphone.
But what's great about our program is the simplicity of it. When a customer comes into our store and brings their smartphone, they're going to be asked some really basic questions. We're not going to be nitpicking the customer on, is it scratched or does it have stickers on it? We're going to ask 5 really simple questions.
A trade-in program would make it very likely for me to get a new phone because then I could get it sooner.
If they offered more money back for my phone, I would definitely go there first.
Definitely, I would be more likely to shop at a store that would trade in.
The smartphone consumer is a valuable one to many retailers, and right now a growth spot for Walmart. While the overall entertainment category has been an underperformer for the retailer, Bratsby says Walmart has continuously grown its wireless market share over the past 18 months. Walmart certainly isn't the only one offering a trade-in program. Best Buy, Apple, Verizon, AT&T, and others also offer store credit for used smartphones. eBay doesn't offer a trade-in program, but its My Gadgets tool allows sellers to upload the specifications of electronics and then post devices for sale when prices peak.
when we compare to this day to a month ago, we've seen a 44% increase in iPhone 5 listings on the platform. On eBay right now, the average selling price for an iPhone 5 is $430, which is significantly more than customers can realize through most other channels out there.
eBay sellers can do whatever they want with the cash. It's not tied to the purchase of a new smartphone or a specific retailer like other trade-in programs. Since smartphone models are identical no matter where they're bought, trade-in programs will need to be as competitive as the prices for the new devices. May the best trade-in value win. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Courtney Reagan.
And finally tonight, a new survey of the nation's best cities to which to retire. And if you're thinking they're all in Florida, you're wrong. The website topretirements.com says many retiring baby boomers are moving into cities and communities where they can ditch the car and walk to stores, restaurants, and social events. In the number 5 spot, Ocean County, New Jersey. Well, you can't do a lot of walking there, frankly. Number 4, Portland, Oregon. Number 3, Music City, Nashville. Second place, Austin, Texas. And the best city to retire?
Drum roll.
Phoenix, Arizona. Where would you retire?
I'm a Big Apple girl. I think it has everything. You can walk, transportation, theater, ballet.
And get deliveries.
And get deliveries, and it's hip and cool. And when you get to a certain age, you want to be hip and cool.
You want to be hip and cool. I've got a sweet spot for Charlottesville, Virginia, but I like New York City. I think it's a great place to retire to, and a healthy place because you're walking all the time.
We got to put that advertisement, I Heart New York.
Yeah.
That's Nightly Business Report for tonight. I'm Susie Garrett. And for more on all the stories that we cover tonight, go to our website, nbr.com.
And I'm Tyler Matheson. Thanks from me as well. Have a great evening, everybody. We'll hope to see you back here tomorrow night.
Nightly Business Report has been brought to you by
Sailing through the heart of historic cities and landscapes on a river, you get close to iconic landmarks, to local life, to cultural treasures. Viking River Cruises, exploring the world in comfort.
I'm Susie Garrett with a Nightly Business Report news brief. Another triple-digit gain for the Dow on growing hopes for a diplomatic solution to the crisis in Syria that would avert a military strike. Wall Street liked that. The Dow soared 128 points, ending solidly above the 15,000 level. The Nasdaq was up nearly 23 points, closing at a fresh 13-year high, and the S&P added 12. While stocks climbed, selected commodities swooned. Oil prices dropped nearly 2%, while gold tumbled nearly $23 an ounce. Alcoa, Bank of America, and Hewlett-Packard are moving out of the Dow Jones Industrial Average, while Goldman Sachs, Visa, and Nike will be coming in. Apple unveiled 2 new iPhones, one made with plastic and coming in 5 bright colors. And rising home prices have sharply cut the number of underwater mortgage holders. Be sure to tune in to Nightly Business Report right here on your public television station.